All right, so we are right at about 1 minute past. So I'm sure we'll have some more people that funnel in as we get the ball rolling, but let's go ahead and kick this off. So welcome everyone to our Nautobot ChatOps webinar today. We've got Matt Vitale, who is going to be doing a great presentation and demo on getting up and going with Nautobot ChatOps. And also myself, I'm Jeremy White. I am the new product owner for the ChatOps plugins within Nautobot itself. So kind of helping to steward the long-term development and exposure of what we can do with ChatOps and the power that comes along with these solutions. So as Matt is going through the presentation, I'm going to be actively monitoring the Q&A and chat so that if there's any questions that need to be asked or anything like that, feel free to drop them in the chat. I'll be happy to be responding in out of band while Matt is presenting. And then towards the end, we're going to have some reserved session to kind of do some more Q&A and kind of open this, kind of reviewing some of the questions in chat to kind of discuss openly with everybody else. So sweet. We're at about 20 some odd members and the attendees. So Matt, are you ready to get us kicked off?
Absolutely. Ready to go?
Awesome. Ready to go.
All right, let's do this. I'll share my screen and then we'll get started. Excellent. So we're going to do a mix of a presentation with some demos later today. So just to get started, really good morning, everybody. Welcome to my presentation on ChatOps for network and DevOps engineers. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Matt Vitale, as I was previously introduced, and I am a senior network automation consultant with Network to Code. And if we're all ready to begin, let's go ahead. We'll get started with learning all about ChatOps and how you can get started with it today. So during today's webinar presentation, we'll start with an overview of what ChatOps is. We'll then go into why businesses may want to leverage ChatOps in their organization. From there, I'll give a brief demo on some example ChatOps uses currently available today through the open source project Nautobot and its plugins. Then we'll go into the overall architecture of what this looks like. Lastly, we'll show exactly how you can get started building a ChatOps bot yourself, just like the ones that I'll be demoing. And we'll finish up with a live demo showing exactly how to do just that, getting started developing your own bot. We will go through the entire process from start to finish, showing how easy it is to get started. The goals of this webinar presentation is for everyone to have a better understanding of ChatOps in general. My hope is by the end of the hour, you can easily explain why ChatOps can be useful, how it works at a high level, and both learn about and be able to provide real-world ChatOps use case scenarios for your own environment. I also hope you come away from here learning about tools that enable ChatOps and with a basic idea of how to get started developing your own ChatOps solutions. Before I go further, I want to give a brief overview of me. As I mentioned before, my name is Matt Vitale, and I've always had a strong passion for scripting and all things automation for my whole career in IT. Some of my interests outside of network automation, I'm playing soccer, fishing, going to hockey games with my family, and working on my car. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a senior network automation consultant here at Network to Code and have been here since January of last year. About 5 to 6 years ago, I started transitioning my work as a traditional network engineer to be more specifically focused on scripting and network automation. I started my IT career in the networking field back in 2007, and since then, I've expanded my skill set to also include tools such as Python and Ansible and other automation aspects. I've also developed a strong love of ChatOps over the past few years, and I'm very excited to share this all with you today. ChatOps overview. So as we get started, it's good to give a brief overview of ChatOps in general and what exactly it is. Some of the most popular tools out there today in the business world are Slack, Microsoft Teams, Cisco Webex, Mattermost, and there are many others available for both commercial and private use, such as IRC, Discord, etc. But chances are you are already using one of these platforms today at work. So what exactly is ChatOps? Well, an easy one-line explanation is ChatOps is the pairing of collaborative chat with IT operations. But what exactly does that mean? Well, if we look at the tools we just discussed, we can group these into the category of collaborative chat tools. These enable us to chat with other people all throughout the company and even throughout the world. Then there are the network operations tools, with some popular examples shown here. Normally, these two systems are separate from one another. Collaborative chat for people, ops tools for interacting with the network, with minimal to no overlap. Each tool is interacted with directly on each of their individual systems, both manually and independently of each other. This is where the beauty of ChatOps comes into play. ChatOps bridges the gap between collaborative chat tools and traditional network operations tools, allowing users to easily communicate with other systems and tools using collaborative chat systems, not just with people. We can then leverage ChatOps to interact with systems such as Kentic to allow a user to easily run reports or pull graphs with a single command. We can also enable a user to pull inventory information from Ansible Tower using a simple command. These specific examples show a response on a user's phone with a mobile app, and the other one is from their desktop client. Both of these are simple for users to run, and they are returned to users in interfaces that they are familiar with. So why ChatOps? Well, there are a number of primary benefits you get when leveraging ChatOps. The first is the ability for users to easily access information. Existing ChatOps tools already provide a simple, powerful, and familiar user interface. Users can find information from multiple sources from within the same tool and same interface. Since chat applications work on laptops and mobile devices, users can access this information from anywhere. Next, it empowers users. Users can easily find information on their own without needing to submit tickets or contact other departments. You can easily control what users can and can't see or do based on roles and permissions. It also allows users to make scripted, predefined changes in a controlled manner. Third, ChatOps just saves time. It reduces tickets to the network team or other teams for simple tasks or information requests. It provides quick access to automation tools without needing to set up a user on each individual tool they want access to, and training them on how to use it. It also enables users to troubleshoot issues while on the go. Lastly, it enables team collaboration. All ChatOps interactions have a history of commands and tasks ran, which allows team members to see the results and outputs and work together while troubleshooting. Team members can easily see who is running what command, what the output was or the results, and learn from simply observing. So here's the key point I want to make, which really highlights one of the strongest benefits of ChatOps. People are comfortable with and are already using chat platforms on a daily basis. I really want to emphasize this point. I mean, think about it. How resistant are people normally to change? Now, think about asking them to use a brand new tool with a new interface and way of interacting with it. What if it's a CLI-based tool? What if it's run locally on their machine versus in the cloud? What if it's even as simple as changing ChatOps SaaS providers? By leveraging an existing tool people are already using daily and are familiar with, the adoption rate of your automation will be much higher and much faster than if you ask other people to use a brand new tool with an unfamiliar or non-standard interface. Now, let's take a look at each of these four interfaces for all four of these major ChatOps SaaS providers I mentioned earlier. What do all of these interfaces have in common? Well, a lot actually. They're all laid out in a very similar manner. They all have similar layouts. They all feature similar methods of interacting with them. Color schemes are similar. Most users are comfortable with these UI interfaces, and a lot of work has gone into these UI interfaces and how they're laid out from these other companies. The users are also able to use one of these platforms fairly easily just by jumping in. It's even easier to transition to a new one if, say, your business decides to change ChatOps SaaS providers. In fact, they're so similar, you probably didn't even realize I had switched the screenshots for Slack and Mattermost. They are near identical in how their overall interface is laid out. In general, people are more comfortable interacting with systems conversationally. They are able to use predefined chat commands with a standardized syntax and get standardized output that the application handles for you. ChatOps enables anyone from junior level to senior level to people in non-technical departments to be able to interact with your automation, other tools, or systems. They are using an interface they are already familiar with in more of a conversational manner instead of your standard CLI input and output. Let's take a look at this example. In this case, the user can select specific sites and racks from drop-down menus. This is part of the request to the chatbot directly. Once all of the necessary information is provided, we can see a response is provided back to the user with custom text that is more like a standard English response compared to a raw text output from running a command. Lastly, a chatbot can be interactive. It can ask and respond to questions, provide buttons, images, files to download, or other methods of user interaction that the end user is already familiar or comfortable with. Another thing that ChatOps can provide that not many people may think about initially is transparency. Any interactions with a chatbot can be set up so they are publicly viewable in the channels they are ran in, and other people can see them and learn from them. Everyone can see things such as what has been done, when it was done, any ticket numbers or related ticket info, who ran the command, and what is left to do, if anything. You can also go back in the chat logs and see a history of what was ran, by whom, when, and what the results were. A common strategy is to set up one or more channels specifically for chatbot interactions, allowing all commands to be stored there without cluttering up public channels where people regularly converse with each other. However, based on the chatbot and the functionality, you can also develop other ones that integrate with regular public channels that people interact with throughout other conversations with others. Here's one example with a fairly lengthy response, so it's spread across a couple of screenshots, but it shows a bunch of information viewable to anyone in the channel where this command was ran, not just the user who submitted it. You could see ticket info, you could see what was done, the output, you could even see the status of the results. In this case, this ticket was completed successfully. A lot of times I get asked, so what can you automate? Or what can ChatOps work with? Well, the simple answer is it can work with any network device or tool, really. Users can interact with many different technologies via a single chat platform. It eliminates the whole swivel chair concept, which is essentially context switching between tools and apps, causing delays. We see here one example of ChatOps being used with Arista Cloud Vision, with another example of ChatOps pulling inventory data from Ansible Tower or AWX, and a third example of using Kentik and pulling NetFlow information. The number of tools ChatOps can work with is obviously many more than just these three, but they kind of give a good overview of current capabilities that we have available and that you can find with existing Nautobot ChatOps plugins. ChatOps also improves the pace of day-to-day operations. It can significantly reduce the administrative churn of mundane daily tasks, such as opening or managing tickets, causing less tickets needing to be manually managed and interacted with. It reduces the amount of people involved in very simple tasks by empowering those users to perform those tasks themselves, and it reduces the time needed for other teams to get basic information needed for them to do their own operational or strategic level tasks. There's no more holdup waiting on the network team or the sysadmin team to come back with information for them to continue on with their project. In this example, we have a user from the networking department needing to know what is connected to port Ethernet 2 on switch ATL01-Leaf02. They can run a simple ChatOps command to pull this information from a source of truth tool such as Nautobot. We can see here the specific information the user needed from the table output. Overall, the elapsed time it took to look up this information is mere seconds. No ticket was needed, no other teams needed to be contacted, and the lookup was done automatically in the background. One interesting question I've been asked is, do we need yet another tool? But I don't look at it like that at all. ChatOps isn't another tool. It's leveraging the capabilities of an existing tool already in place and in use in your company, and it combines it with other existing tools, scripts, and automation. It handles all UI and UX components for you, eliminating the need to deal with those aspects of automation. It provides an already familiar user interface to your users, and is actually one less tool they have to learn. Lastly, there are less browser tabs that need to be opened, which I think we can all agree is a good thing. For example, a typical user will have a laptop running either Windows, OS X, or Linux. From there, they may have various other tools already installed, such as Docker, Chrome, Visual Studio Code, PowerShell, etc. These tools can even drill down further, running other tools like Python or Ansible from the terminal. The same can be said for web browsers, where other tools such as ServiceNow, Ansible AWX, Grafana, Palo Alto Panorama, all of those, they're all accessed from a web browser. I mean, here's a real life example of what my current tools look like. And this is just my work profile in Chrome. This is my home profile on the same computer, just in Chrome. And these are all of the applications I already have installed and that I use on a regular basis. I really don't want to manage yet another tool no more than anyone else does. So now I'm going to go ahead and pause this presentation and shift to showing some real world examples of ChatOps plugins that are available for you to use today and how they work. So I'll close out of this slide real briefly, and I'm going to pull up my Slack window here. And I have a channel called NTC Automation Demos that we use for demoing different aspects of Nautobot and different ChatOps plugins. So for example, the first command I'm going to run is I want to ask ChatOps, my ChatOps bot, can you get me the devices in my source of truth Nautobot? So I'll run Nautobot, get devices. And as part of my backend automation, it's going to prompt me, hey, filter down what you want. Do you want to sort by name, by site, by model? In this case, I want to get all of the devices in my site at Atlanta. So I'll select site, Atlanta, and we can see here ChatOps will pretty quickly come back with a list of all devices in my source of truth that I have in Atlanta. And I can also take this, and by the nature of Slack and how it works with tables and exporting, I can very easily download this file and export it out and use it like in other tools or to run reports on. So another example we can use of other tools is with IP Fabric. So let's say, for example, I want to get information from IP Fabric and I want to get inventory data. So we'll run IP Fabric, get inventory. And in this case, it'll be the same options. What do you want to filter by? So in this example, we'll go by vendor and we'll select, let's go with Cisco. So this will pull all devices in our demo instance of IP Fabric that are of the type vendor type Cisco. In this case, we have 3. Let's go through a few more examples. We'll go with ACI because I know ACI is very popular. So let's say we want to get nodes, all the nodes in the ACI system. I'll select our kit cluster and it'll come back again, very, very fast, very quick. And it's all automated on the back end. So that is using the ACI ChatOps plugin. For those that are Arista customers, we can look at Cloud Vision. So we can run Cloud Vision, for example, get device configuration. Now, in this case, I'm not running give me all devices. I'm saying give me specific information about one device. So let's do get device information. And in this case, we'll just go ahead and select Spine 1 in New York City. And after a brief second or two, it'll actually output the entire running configuration that I want for this device. So we can see here, this is everything we have in our demo instance. And again, I can also download this and look at it or export it as needed. Let's continue on. Let's look at a few more examples. So one other external tool I mentioned earlier is Palo Alto's Panorama. So this one's kind of cool. This is our first firewall example I'll go over. So we can actually get device rules and say, hey, go into Panorama and get me the different ACL rules on Panorama that are configured. So we have a virtual Palo Alto device stood up in our demo instance. So we'll select that one. It'll go through and it'll query all the rules. And we can see here that on our Palo Alto, we have a whole bunch of different example rules that we've created. And we can export these as well. So in this case, this automation prints it off in a tabular format that I can read as a user. I can also write my automation to export it as a CSV file, a PDF. We saw graphs earlier in the presentation, stuff like that. So these are all using third-party tools. But let's say, for example, we want to write our own Python script or write our own custom automation that isn't from a commercial product. So you can absolutely do that. And if you run it on the back end, you can integrate it with ChatOps and have ChatOps integrate it with your Python scripts. That's actually one of the first ways I got started with it. So let's say, for example, a common use case of help desk engineers or technicians is sometimes you have an IP address on the network, whether it comes from security or logging or just any other tooling you have, and you want to know where it's connected. And tracking it down can take some time. So we have a script as an example where if I run netops find IP 10.1.1.1, and in this example, I want to know where on my network this IP address is. I don't want to go look it up myself. I'll say, hey, chatbot, find this for me. This will take a couple seconds. It'll track it down, and then it'll report back the IP address is located on New York City switch 01 connected to gigabit Ethernet 1.3, and here's the MAC address. Now, this is a limited snapshot of information, but I could always expand my custom scripts to include things like the port configuration or additional client details, whatever I choose, and then report back to the user. Now, this user doesn't have to create a ticket for network engineering to go track it down. They can find it within a matter of seconds. One last example we can look at is if we look at net get facts. This is a very similar example to before, where if I want to find out facts, let's say from this router right here. So this will take a little bit longer, but it'll actually go and we can have it set to pull live data from a device and report back to the user of what exactly they may or may not need on a regular basis. So get facts goes out, it queries this router, and it comes back with some key information that in this case, our company may or may not, or it may need for whatever task they use. So I could see neighborship, I could see memory status, host name, image, etc. Very quick, easy way to get high level information in ChatOps right away. Now, it doesn't always have to just be get commands or show commands. We can also create read-write commands. But in this case, I'm just showing some easy examples of read-only commands. We can also see, so I showed one command from each of the different plugins, but if we look and we just run the command like as a help, we can see we have a lot of different commands available. So in Nautobot, I can get or change device status. That's an example of a read-write command. I can get rack information, circuit information, etc. I can do the same thing with IP fabric. We could see, for example, we can get or set a snapshot. We can do an end-to-end path lookup, stuff like that. Panorama, when we look at firewalls, we can do things like upload or install software. We can export device rules. We can even run a packet capture on there, which is really, really cool. So all of these commands, or all these plugins have a multitude of commands built in. The great thing about open source software and all of this being open source is you can also write your own commands, which we'll be going into a little bit further in the presentation. So you can expand on these and either use them internally or submit them up into the open source community, and then we can all benefit from them. So that's my example of a few different commands. I'm going to shift now back to the presentation, and we'll continue from there. Excuse me 1 second. I'm going to clean up the screen here. I got moved over. Excellent. All right, let's try that again. So architecture. Let's go over how Nautobot can enable you to easily and efficiently run ChatOps applications. The Nautobot ChatOps framework is built on top of Nautobot, which is an extensible automation platform. We start with the platform itself, in this case, Nautobot. Nautobot is an open source source of truth platform that has support for numerous plugins. One of those is the ChatOps plugin with support for many different other existing tools, as we saw just a few minutes ago in the demo. Next up is the framework, where the ChatOps app plugin provides the framework and abstraction layer between the chat apps and the underlying chatbot code. After that, we have chat integrations. Now, these are where we write additional functionality into ChatOps for various tools you may have. Some of the current ones we already have written that leverage the Nautobot ChatOps framework are listed here, and that I showed earlier, such as with IP Fabric, Ansible, Meraki, etc. From there, we have chat commands. These are the commands that are ran by the users from within the chat application itself. We can have existing out-of-the-box commands that are predefined and worked right away. Those are the ones that I just showed a few minutes ago in Slack. Or we can create our own custom commands with backend logic to run whatever we may need. That's an example of the NetOps find IP 10.1.1.1 command. On top of this are the chat applications we use regularly, such as Slack, Microsoft Teams, Webex, or Mattermost. The great thing about using the Nautobot ChatOps platform is that any command written for any tool or written for one of these tools will work across all 4 of these platforms. And with the extensible nature of open source software, any new platforms can easily be added in if ever needed. This is another point I really want to emphasize here, as it's such a big benefit to using a platform like Nautobot. Should your company ever change chat application providers in the future, or you want to use this across different platforms for any reason, all of the existing code and automation you've already installed or custom written will already work. Let's use the command Nautobot get devices as an example. Once we add in support for this one command, it will natively work across any or all of the providers listed here. So should your company change which system it uses at some point, or you want to add support for multiple systems, the only thing that needs to be updated is which of the SaaS platforms are active within Nautobot. With Nautobot as your ChatOps platform, it also takes care of security, logging, and access controls for you. The security is transparent to the user, and all command permissions are handled behind the scenes, configurable directly in Nautobot. Here we can see an example of a ChatOps security setup. We can configure access grants by any combination of individual channel, individual user, or by organization. We can also configure the access grants by both command and subcommand. Not only does Nautobot provide security and access controls for its ChatOps platform, it also has detailed activity logging saved for every interaction made with the bot. Each command ran is logged in the system and documented in the workspace. It logs details such as who ran it, what command and subcommand were ran, what parameters were provided, as well as other info. Here's an example of the usage records showing a couple of users running some commands and what they were looking for. For example, here we can see that on August 18th at 7:38 p.m., John Doe used the bot to find the status of device AMS01-Leaf06. We can also see that the command was allowed and succeeded. If it failed or was blocked from access grants or permissions, it would show up as such under the status column as well. As a side note, this screenshot was taken as an example from our demo instance of Nautobot with the ChatOps plugin installed and ready to play with. You can find it at demo.nautobot.com with the credentials you see in the banner on the screen. This is a list of all of the tools currently supported within the Nautobot ChatOps ecosystem. Through the use of individual plugin extensions, you can download and install. We are continuing to release support for new tools over time and expand on the existing tools as well over time. And we welcome any feature requests, any bugs, issues identified, or just general code submissions if you are interested in contributing. We're real big with the open source community, and we love contributing and getting feedback and working with the community as well. So we welcome any kind of feedback. Absolutely. So now, towards the end of this presentation, what we'll do is we'll start to go over how you can get started with Nautobot ChatOps and even developing your own custom integrations using open source tools. Before we go into the specific demo and process of how this works, I want to go over some of the tools and processes that we use at a high level and that I'm about to show you, so you at least have a basic high-level understanding of them in the demo in a couple of minutes, okay? So let's start with Cookie Cutter. Cookie Cutter creates a new project environment based on a template, along with the folder structure, the files, any settings that are needed in those files as well. Docker, probably very familiar with, runs applications in containers locally on your computer, and it'll eliminate complex VM installs and setting up applications or running VirtualBox, anything like that. Poetry is an easy-to-use Python package and dependency management tool, which handles all of the backend logic of figuring out which versions of different packages to install based on dependencies and all that downstream, basically looking it all up downstream. Invoke is a Python package that lets you run Python functions directly from the CLI. Lastly, ngrok is a tool you may need to open traffic inbound to your laptop from the SaaS service providers over the internet. I will not be using it in this demo, as I will instead show you how to run everything locally without needing to connect to any SaaS applications over the internet. We will be running a Mattermost instance locally on my laptop, but if I wanted to develop against Slack or Microsoft Teams or something from the services in the cloud, I may need to use ngrok to allow the traffic inbound to my laptop. All right, demo time. We are going to create a brand new ChatOps plugin for this webinar using a new Cookie Cutter repository we've recently released as open source, and I believe it was released officially yesterday evening, and we'll show all that in just a minute. Now, before I get started, I've pre-recorded all of the steps needed to get a project up and running in the interest of saving time, as some of the steps take a few minutes to run when run in real time. We'll start with the cookie cutter repository already cloned down from GitHub on my computer. This is that new repository I just mentioned that we released yesterday, which allows anyone to quickly and easily get a development environment going for creating and using Nautobot ChatOps with automation. I'll be walking through this process now as it is very fast and simple. So first thing we're going to do is use that Poetry tool to run Poetry install. Now, if you're familiar with Python, you're probably familiar with creating virtual environments via like Python venv is a common folder name. In this case, Poetry will do the exact same thing, but handle everything on the back end. It will not create a virtual environment for you in this directory. It'll create it on the back end and install any necessary packages as per the package dependency file pyproject.toml, which if you used to virtual environments, it would be requirements.txt. In this case, you can see I am installing the packages for Python needed for this cookie cutter project. This is not for Nautobot. This is for the cookie cutter repo in order to create templates of and new folders and file structures. So next, I'm going to run Poetry shell. This will activate that virtual environment. You can see that my command prompt now has changed. So on the left, we have Nautobot plugin, ChatOps, cookie cutter, and some random stuff. That's the name of my virtual environment that I just created using Poetry install. So now I will clear the screen out and we're going to look at the directory structure here. So we can see as I go to bake the cookie or use cookie cutter to create the folder and file structure, which is affectionately called baking a cookie. I love that term. We can see what we have. This is directly from GitHub. So there's no new folder created. When I'm done creating the cookie or creating the folder template, we will see a brand new folder in here. So let's run cookie cutter period, because we want to run it with the files local to this directory. So the first three commands we'll pause on. What cookie cutter does is it'll use that file that you see at the top called cookiecutter.json, and it will ask the user or a series of questions in order to properly configure whatever template it's using. So in this case, we want to deploy Nautobot and a ChatOps plugin with a custom command called webinar, which is the third question down. So it'll automatically fill all that info in as necessary in the template when generating the folder structure. So the first couple are me, that's my name and email address for just creating author information. And the next one is webinar. So when I run the ChatOps command, it'll be /webinar. If I wanted to run against Cisco, it would be /Cisco, for example. Now, the rest of these that you see here, I'm going to leave as default. So I'm going to pause this real briefly. We could see we have plugin name, verbose name, plugin slug, stuff like that. This is how a lot of the Python code and some of the other files settings are configured. We can really just leave these as default, but they're there if you'd like to change them. Min and max Nautobot version, fine by default. We're going to leave it as the latest version of this project because we're just developing. We'll leave it as 0.1. We want the open source license to default to Apache 2. Now, this last option that we see, we're going to leave as default as well. Really, almost all of these are left as default. We're going to select yes to set up local Mattermost dev environment. This will create a local Mattermost instance that we can use for developing our ChatOps plugin against and our commands against very quickly without needing to create an account on Slack or any of the other SaaS providers. Okay, so we don't even need to have access to the internet in order to do this. Well, once it's up and running. So, okay, so now we can see that cookie cutters ran. I'm going to exit out of this virtual environment, and then I'm going to list the directory contents as well. So if you compare it to the top, we have one additional directory called Nautobot plugin ChatOps webinar. This was created by cookie cutter, specific to what I want, which is going to be this webinar ChatOps command. So let's change into the directory and look at the directory structure again. And we can see all these files were created from the template, and cookie cutter created all of them and filled in all applicable settings, both file names as well as within the files. Now in here, there's a couple commands we have to do to get it up and running. And you can see it slightly above with the yellow triangles and exclamation marks. It says we need to copy over the example credential file, and then we need to run poetry lock. So I'm going to do exactly that. I'm going to copy over the example credential file in my development folder. I'm not going to modify it for this demo. I'm going to leave it as default because everything's local to my laptop. So it has a lot of default like admin credentials. Obviously, you don't want that in a regular environment, but for purpose of this demo, it'll work great. Now I'm going to run poetry lock. Sometimes this can take some time, so I sped it up, but this will generate the lock file for poetry, which essentially tells poetry, it takes the list of Python packages you want, and it'll generate all the dependencies and the versions and everything that needs to be installed. So when poetry goes to install the virtual environment, it uses the lock file. We generate the lock file here. And now I run poetry install again to create the virtual environment for my Nautobot ChatOps environment. And you can see there's a lot more, so I sped this up. These are all the packages for Nautobot for like the different Slack or Webex SDKs, stuff like that. This does not include Cookie Cutter because this is specific for my Nautobot ChatOps instance. Now, since I've installed it, I'm going to activate my virtual environment. So now we have the new virtual environment that I'm in, and I'm ready to go. Everything's set up locally, automatically installed. I'll clear the screen out again. And this time I'll run invoke build. Now, invoke, as we mentioned earlier, is kind of a way to run a Python function or a set of functions directly from the CLI. So in this case, when I run invoke build, there's actually some Python functions on the backend, which I can show you in a minute, that run Docker compose and generate all the images for Docker needed to get this running locally. This is all cache, and I sped it up for the sake of time, but it goes ahead, it'll pull the images down and create the images for Docker. The next command, since we're using Mattermost locally, is going to be invoke setup Mattermost. Now this will automatically set up and configure Mattermost and Nautobot locally on my laptop. I don't have to worry about any of that. We could see, you may see there's an error here right in the middle of the screen. That's just as part of the process. If you see that, don't worry about it. Automation will, or the shell script will automatically create the token needed that it's throwing an error for. Again, I've sped this up for the sake of time. So now Mattermost container has been spun up and configured. Now I'm going to run invoke start. So I'll clear the screen. And if we run invoke start, it'll run all necessary containers to get Nautobot up and running locally on my computer. If I run Docker PS, we can see here that I have 5 containers running. So the first 2 are Nautobot worker and Nautobot, the Nautobot worker and then the Nautobot UI. So the worker handles like lots of the processes on the backend and handling the logic, but Nautobot _1 will be like your UI and your Django framework. Postgres is your Postgres container, Redis is your Redis container, and then Mattermost is your locally running Mattermost instance. So that's part of the pre-recorded. I recorded this earlier and sped everything up for the sake of time, but now I'm going to close out this video and we're actually going to take it from here and we're going to demo this live instance running locally on my laptop. So, and I forgot actually, so one last thing I have on here as a reference because we'll be publishing these later. We have a list of commands. Everything that I ran, I put here with a brief overview of kind of what it is or what it does. So these are all the commands that I ran in order. And if you run them in order as well, after cloning down the GitHub repository, you should be in the same state that I am currently in right now. The only one I didn't show is invoke stop. Invoke stop will start all of, or it will stop all of the containers that I started for Docker using my invoke start command. So we can run invoke stop, start, invoke stop back and forth if we ever need to, okay? So that's the reference. And then the link to the new GitHub repo for all this code I just showed is up there in the top right under our Nautobot organization. It's Nautobot ChatOps Cookie Cutter. And I'll show that also in just a minute. Okay, now let's go do that live demo I just mentioned. So let's close out of this presentation. I'm going to shift over to Google Chrome. And we can see here, I'm running on my local host at 127.0.0.1, port 8080 is an instance of Nautobot running in Docker. So when I first log in, let's refresh it to make sure it's live. Perfect. I'm going to log in using the default credentials admin. Okay. So this is a brand new instance of Nautobot. There isn't really anything in here. To show real briefly a couple of the settings. So under our plugins menu option, we have for Nautobot ChatOps, we have where we can set access grants with it, which are permissions. So in this case, I have wildcard permissions for any command to run for any organization, any channel, any user. These are not normally configured by default. However, the setup Mattermost command with that shell script, it creates this for us, so we don't have to deal with it. Everything is just ready to go. Same thing if I go to plugins, command tokens. Mattermost requires a command token to run. So this is automatically created by my local shell script and uploaded into Nautobot. It's ready to go. I don't have to worry about setting up Mattermost. It's set up for me. We could see that if we look at the token, it's just gibberish randomly generated at runtime. So, and then the last thing that I'll show is if I go to command usage records, we could see this is me running some test commands earlier, but we could see a history, and I'll go through and show this as well later, history of different commands that were ran, who ran them, the command that was ran, the subcommand, any parameters that were passed, if it succeeded, if it was blocked, stuff like that. Now, we will not see any blocked commands because by the wildcard permissions, we're allowing everything. But if we wanted to demo that, we can always restrict certain commands and it would show up as blocked under here or failed. So now, before I get into Mattermost, which I also have running locally here on port 8065, I'm going to go ahead and log into this in just a minute. Before I show that, I want to show the code that we just generated using this GitHub repository. So this GitHub repository right here is what I cloned down, and I ran the cookie cutter command and the poetry commands from. So we run poetry and we reference these two files right here to generate the virtual environment. Cookie cutter will reference this to generate the template. Now the template folder is this weird looking folder name right here. So how cookie cutter works is anywhere in any directory names or files, if we look at, excuse me, it looks for the double curly braces and then cookie cutter dot something, and it essentially uses that as a variable to replace it. So we can drill down into this and take a look where if I go into the plugin name, it'll name this that Nautobot ChatOps plugin webinar that we named it. And if I go in here, same thing with this Python file. If I go in here, we could see it'll replace it. So cookie cutter handles generating all of this for us dynamically based on how we answer those questions that I showed earlier. It's actually a really nice little program to get up and running in a consistent environment every time. So I'm going to open up Visual Studio Code for just a moment. So in here, I have the same repo cloned down, okay? But what I have here on the left is you could see all the different files and folders I just showed you. However, we have that new one that we created in that pre-recorded video. This is called Nautobot plugin ChatOps webinar. So if I go in here, excuse me, we can see the directory folder names were automatically generated. We could see here in this worker file, we could see where it automatically populates some of the custom commands. I said I wanted my command to be webinar. Cookie cutter puts that in for us in here when it generates all these files, okay? So in this worker file, this is where we're going to see what commands are run and how we can add our own commands. In this example, it comes with a default hello world command, very simple. Let's break it down. The @subcommand of decorator says this is a subcommand of the parent /webinar. So I run /webinar, this will pop up. What command is it exactly? Whatever the function name is. So the command /webinar, hello world. So we can look at this like /webinar, hello world. That's what we have so far. Now, dispatcher is just part of the backend logic Nautobot handles to interact with any of the ChatOps SaaS providers. But when we look at arg1 is optional. That says, hey, do you want the user to pass an argument? So if I delete arg1, they can run webinar hello world and it works. If I say I want them to pass in their name, I would put arg1 and now they would add hello world Matt, where arg1 right here would equal Matt. So we have the name of the function is the subcommand. This right here is the / command. And then the arg1 or arg2 or arg3 is going to be here. So if I added arg2, I would add a second name after that, for example, okay? Then we look at the comments or the initial comment underneath the function, run logic and return to user. This is the help text that will display to the user when they go to run this. And then dispatcher send markdown is simply a way that Nautobot handles sending markdown flavored text to the ChatOps program. In this case, all I'm saying is responding back with the text command/webinar hello world received with argument 1, whatever I put in. And then some other examples here, and then I will return true at the bottom. So let's go do that. In order to log into Mattermost, I'm going to go into my development folder here. I'm going to go to my mattermost.env file here, and I'm going to see my username and password. Now, since Nautobot's admin, it's very easy. Mattermost doesn't necessarily like that. So we create a password, Nautobot123 with 2 exclamations. So let's copy that. I'm going to go back into Chrome, go to localhost 8065, which is my local Mattermost instance running on my laptop, and do admin and that Nautobot password I just showed you. And we'll sign in. Excellent. So now this is running. This is not going out to the internet. We can actually run /webinar right now, and let's see what happens. We have the command that I just showed, hello world with an argument 1. So let's test it out. If I go webinar, hello world, Matt, we should receive back that string that we just mentioned. Command webinar hello world received with argument 1 equals Matt. That's exactly what we wrote our Python logic to do in Nautobot. So this is a great way to get started, but let's say I want to add my own custom command, and we'll do that right now. So I'm going to go back into Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to open back up this worker file here. And instead of underneath hello world, we'll create a second command. And you could see here that I have a second command commented out. So let's just uncomment it. And we'll break it down again. It's a subcommand of webinar. This command will be called example-command. And this will be the help text. We are not passing any arguments. And all we are going to do is just return back a very simple example command succeeded to the user. That's it. So I will save this file. Now, before I go to run it, I need to restart my worker container. And there's a couple ways I can do it. I can easily run invoke stop followed by invoke start, and that'll stop all of my containers and then restart them and kind of refresh the code. That takes a little bit longer though. A much easier way to do it is to get the name of the Docker container by running docker ps. This will list all the names of the containers currently running. I want the name of my worker container, which is the first one right here. So I'll take that, I'll copy it, and then I'll run docker restart and the name of that container. And if this is too complicated or you forget, just remember those commands on the slide earlier, invoke stop, invoke start. They work the same way, they just take a little bit longer because they work on all 5 containers instead of just this one. So we'll restart this worker container here. This will take a couple of seconds. Once it's done, we'll go back into Mattermost, and we should now have a command called example command. So let's open up Google Chrome, and here we can run webinar, and we have a new command that we just created live on this demo called example command, and here's that help text. So let's run webinar example command. We get the text back that we want, example command succeeded. Very, very cool. So one last example that we can do that shows interactions with systems. So very, very simply, I'm going to go back into Visual Studio Code, and I have one last command here that we can use that as an example. So let's uncomment it and break this down again. It's a subcommand of webinar. The command will be get sites. Now, in this case, I'm running some Django logic on the back end to interact with Nautobot. If I wanted to interact with Panorama or Meraki or something else, I would add my API logic in here to go out to the systems and pull whatever information I want, authenticate, parse it out, and then use the dispatcher to send that text or table or whatever you like to the ChatOps platform, okay? In this case, we're going to keep it local and simple. We're going to say, hey, Nautobot, give me all of the sites that you have in your inventory. So for every site, we're just going to create it as a string. Very, very simple, okay? And then we're going to do the same thing. We're going to return it back to the user saying, here's all the sites, 1 site per line. Nice and easy. So we will save this command again. We will run our restart command one more time. We'll give this just a couple of seconds to restart the container. Excellent. Container is restarted. Let's go back into Google Chrome. Now in our Mattermost tab, we can run webinar, and we have a third command here called get sites with the description get all sites in Nautobot. So let's do that. let's do webinar get sites. But it only returned all sites. It didn't return anything. So it's curious, why didn't it return anything? Well, if we go into Nautobot and we go back to the homepage, we can see under sites, we actually don't have any sites created. So let's go to organization, sites, and confirm we have no sites created. So let's do that now. So under sites, if I go to add, let's say I want to create one for home. So I'm at my house working from home. I'll just create home-01. Okay. So actually, let's just delete that. Let's make it a space. Status, it's active. I'm living in my home, definitely active. Okay. So we'll keep that. All the others can just be left as default because they are not required. Scroll on down and we'll click create. Now Nautobot has in its inventory one site called home01. There's no other data with it. There's no devices attached, just a site. If we go back to sites, we could see in a more condensed format, we have one site created, home01. Now, when I run my get sites command, this should populate. So let's go back to Mattermost, the town square channel, and we'll run the same command again. We'll run webinar, get sites, and hit enter. And almost immediately, because it's running locally, it's very, very fast, we get back the site home01. Now, if I added a second site, home02, that would also come back here as well, based on how I wrote that Python function earlier. So very, very simple to get started. Very quick, very easy. We've made it as automated as we possibly could, and getting everything set up on the back end, which really enables you as the community or as DevOps and network engineers to kind of get started with testing this out and either using our own plugins that we've developed and installing those into Nautobot or writing your own. And if we wanted to go, actually, I think that's really the last example that I have. So I think we're going to go ahead and leave this open now for the remainder of the time for any questions that have not yet been addressed or any Q&A. So I'll pause here and leave it open for discussion. I'm not sure, Jeremy, if you're there, if they have speaking permissions or how that works. Do you have anything for me?
I have been kind of going through and keeping up with the questions in chat.
Thank you. Excellent.
So a couple things. So yes, we are planning on posting because this has been a question a couple times, we are planning on posting today's recording at a later date. We're expecting to be able to post this to our YouTube channel. If we do have any issues with posting over the next week or so, please feel free to reach out. Happily able to share it if we run into issues. Not really anticipating, but just in case. There's been some great discussion on access grants in the chat.
Great question.
Yeah, so I just opened up issue number 142 on the parent repo. So right now, access grants give you the ability to filter. Think of it like from the inbound request perspective. So you have the ability of naming very specific things based off of the inbound request. So if you're coming in from a specific command or you're coming in for a specific user, organization, or group, that's how the filtering is done at this time. Issue number 142 on the parent repo gives you is to investigate being able to use some form of a scope to limit what the backend, what you're actually reaching out and grabbing using ChatOps. It could be very interesting on how that could get applied to your downstream chat apps, similar to like Meraki or Kintic or Grafana. But from what you're able to access inside of Nautobot directly, I think that implementing dynamic groups could be an interesting method on limiting from an access grant.
Also, just to show that real briefly, I can't necessarily demo it at the moment. However, what I'll show is we have an access grant that I can create to allow me as a user with username Matt access to this webinar command, and the subcommand specifically get sites. I could say you can use any /webinar command or just get the sites. So if I create this, it'll populate here. Now I can't demo it at the moment because I don't have this user set up in Mattermost, and these wildcards will override it, but that's a way to limit my personal access to only this one subcommand, and I can't run any others. And then the other thing we could see is under command usage records here, This is where we could see the logging, and this is everything that I just ran. So we could see this right here, timestamped. I ran hello world, I passed my name as an argument, and then I have the logs, get sites, I ran that twice. So we could see the full log of commands here as well. Okay.
Very cool. Kind of skim back through just to see other interesting questions. So there's some initial discussion on ChatOps for Jira tickets. So a lot of different companies out there, they do provide their own chat integrations. And Jira or Atlassian has one for that. So that's a great one, just to kind of use the native chat integration with Atlassian instead of developing one or for the Nautobot ChatOps framework.
We also have ChatOps integrations with ServiceNow, for example, where you can actually go in and run and say, hey, I want to deploy a VLAN, for example. And you do this all from ChatOps, and it will go and it'll create a ticket in ServiceNow, and it'll run that automation using Ansible on the backend or whatever you configure. And then it'll report back the status from ServiceNow, and the ChatOps command will kick it off and kind of update the ticket as it goes. So you can run integrations with a lot of different ticketing tools, whether it be Jira, ServiceNow, stuff like that.
Absolutely. We also had some discussion on other chat platforms or other platforms that are in the works, specifically around Juniper.
Oh, so yeah, so I don't believe we have any native chat ops plugins developed at the moment for Juniper, but that is absolutely something that could be developed for. Also, if you write any kind of custom Python logic, so if I open this up back here, I can add in, for example, some logic here, or if Juniper has an SDK, I'm not as familiar with them personally, but you can interact with the Juniper devices, go out, pull that information, whether directly from the devices or your source of truth or something else, and then report back into ChatOps. So if you can interact with it in Python, you can feed it into ChatOps and use it for an interactive way to run your automation.
Yeah, and so for Juniper, you can use like Juniper PyEZ to actually make that connection out to the remote device. There's also Juniper Apster and Juniper Mist that can be used as kind of very similar to like how Panorama and Meraki are done, to where you're interacting with an overarching control plane and grabbing that information and using that for your chat integrations. Absolutely. Cool. So we're we got a minute left. Are there any other questions that anyone would like to throw in chat? All right, everyone. Thank you so much, Matt. This has been an amazing presentation on the Nautobot ChatOps plugin and ChatOps framework. I'm super excited to see the cookie cutter getting published. We should also have the blog post that should be going live either right now or any moment now on our public site, introducing the ChatOps cookie cutter that's in the Nautobot organization on GitHub. And yeah, so super excited for all the fun stuff that's coming out. On that note.
Yeah, it was great. I really appreciate everybody joining. Thank you so much. Very much appreciate it.
Awesome. Catch everyone next time.
Have a good day.